Happy Sunday, guys. Welcome to Kids Corner with Courtney. I'm so glad that you can join me here today. I am actually out of town. I'm virtual with all of you guys this week. That's how I'll be seeing the service and joining with Stu in his message, because I went to visit my niece and play with a 1.5-year-old. So that's what I've been doing. And so I'm so glad that I can still join you in this way. But I have such exciting news, guys. Next week, virtual no longer. You will still have these messages for me, especially for those of you that can't join us in Sunday school. But next week, Sunday school, children's ministry will be back up and running. And I'm so glad that we will get to see your faces, that we will get to spend that time with you. So kiddos, different parents are going to make different choices. They're going to decide that they're ready to come back at different times, and they know specifically what's best for your family. And so they get to make those choices, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a part of them loving you well. But we knew that a lot of families couldn't come back to church at all until we opened up children's ministry. And so the decision has been made to open it on Father's Day weekend on the 21st, and I am so excited to welcome you back at that time. So, enough announcements from me. Let's start in on today's message and join Stu in Ezra chapter 4. So a brief review. In the chapters that we've seen before, and if you've been able to see the videos before this one, you know that the people of God who had been taken away from God's land had been allowed to return, that a king that didn't believe God, didn't follow him well, actually obeyed God in one moment, in one very specific way. And he allowed the people of God to return. And not only did he allow them, he gave them the resources and materials that they needed to make the journey back to the land that God had promised them, and to obey God in a very specific way in the rebuilding of the temple. And we talked about the fact that God is so big and so amazing and such a hero that he can use anyone, even people that don't obey him or believe in him, in order to honor him and follow his ways and to do the things that the Lord needs done. Then we looked at the fact that in addition to the being allowed to go, there's this whole list of people in chapter 2 of all of the beautiful things that the people who went back did. The list of the names, the list of the numbers of people who came back, who obeyed the Lord in this special way, and who were a part of the rebuilding of the temple. Then in chapter 3, we saw the very first thing that they built. They built the altar because they knew that nothing was more important than connecting with the Lord. The very first thing that needed to happen was sacrifice. The very first thing that needed to happen was reestablishing that connection with the Lord in obedience. What happens in the rest of chapter 3 is the laying of the foundations of the temple. And when you get to the end of chapter 3, there is a celebration, because there are older people there that actually got to see the temple when it was standing before it was destroyed. And here they're standing and they see the foundations being laid. They see all the hope of what God has promised them, what God has allowed them to be a part of rebuilding, and they are just filled with joy to the point of weeping. And chapter 3 tells us that the sound of the weeping, the sound of the joy was so loud that it could be heard at a great distance, and that one could not be distinguished from another. So this should just be this moment of great victory, right, guys? The Lord's been faithful. He's provided them with everything that they need. He even did it through someone who doesn't believe in him. He's gathered the people of God together. They've been faithful. They've done their job. They've done what he asked them to do. So we would expect everything to go smoothly from this point on. But we get to chapter 4, and that's not what happens. If you listen to Stu's message, you know that. You know that they faced opposition, that all around them in this land were enemies. Those enemies just didn't stop being there because God had sent them to do this mighty work, this great act of obedience. The enemies didn't just stop because God cared about them. The enemies still lived in the land. And the enemies did something very interesting to start out with. They started by pretending to be friends. The first thing they did was they came and they offered to help build the temple. But the people of God weren't fooled. They knew these people. They knew their history. They knew that they didn't worship the Lord, and they were pretending that they had. In fact, in the beginning of chapter 4, they say that we seek your God and have been sacrificing to them. The people of God weren't fooled. They knew that was a lie. These people wanted to be spies. They wanted to destroy the temple as it was being built. And so they wanted to join the effort of building it so that they could sabotage it, so that they could pull it apart, so they could make it not work. When they didn't succeed in that, because the children of God, the children of Israel, didn't let them help, they tried a new tactic. The next thing they went to was recruiting people to offer false counsel. Well, maybe if we just get to the advisors, the people who are telling them how to build the walls, how to build the temple, if they give them bad advice, then they won't be able to do it. When that didn't work fast enough, they moved to the ultimate thing. There was a king, a new king. We know the first king, even though he didn't believe in God, chose to obey God in this very specific area and send them back. But now, by the time we get to chapter 4, verse 6, there's a different king on the throne, someone who didn't know what the Lord had asked the former king to do, someone who didn't understand what it looked like to obey God in this area. And so they decide to go to this king, whose name was Xerxes, with a very specific complaint. There are a couple of interesting things in this complaint that they send Xerxes. They say to him, there are these people in the land, and they are rebellious and awful, and their city has always been rebellious and awful, and they're trying to rebuild their walls and their temple, and you shouldn't let them. And in fact, we're so angry about you letting them that we won't pay our taxes, even though we know we're supposed to. Do you hear that? In this letter that they're sending, who's actually rebelling or threatening to rebel against the king? The people who wrote the letter owed the king taxes. They owed him money. But are they saying that they're going to do what they had promised to do? Are they going to give what they owed? No. Instead, they're threatening to withhold it unless Xerxes tells the people of Jerusalem, the people who are rebuilding the temple, that they can't do the work anymore. So who's rebelling? It's the people that write the letter, right? But who are the people who write the letter pretending's rebelling? The people of God. People of God aren't rebelling at all. They're doing exactly what they were invited by the former king to do with the supplies he gave them. They aren't leading a revolt. They aren't doing anything wrong. But they're made to look like they're doing something wrong by the people in the land around them, because those people are enemies of God and don't love the things that he loves. When you get to the end of chapter 4, there isn't a happy end at this point in the story. The king believes the people who write the letter. He decides that the people of God are being rebellious and evil, and he won't let them build the temple anymore, and work stops. It looks like God lost. At this moment, at the end of chapter 4, it looks like God's not in control anymore. But is that true, guys? Not even close. The same God that could move the heart of an evil king and have him send them with gold and silver and wood and animals and everything they needed to build the temple is still at work, and he hasn't forgotten them. So what do you do? What do I do with this information in our lives? Hopefully we're not trying to build a temple or trying to visit or write a letter to an evil king. But I think that there are times where we all play the different parts of this story. There are 3 different parts, right? There's one set of people that are being lied about. We know how we feel when we're lied about. It's an ugly thing. It's hard. It makes us angry and hurt because telling the truth matters, and we deserve to have the truth told about us. It is not okay to lie or to be lied about. Then there's another group of people who are the group of people in authority, Xerxes, the king, who receives the letter and has to make a decision about who's telling the truth. Sometimes my kids play in the pool while I watch from a distance. And inevitably, guys, my children fight in the pool. Someone touched someone, and of course I haven't seen it. And so I end up in this mess of trying to figure out who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth and who started it and who did all the things. Okay? If I'm behaving as a just authority, I might not always get it right. I can try hard to know who's telling the truth and still be fooled. And that probably happens sometimes in your life, where your parents or your grandparents or your babysitter doesn't understand the full concept of what's happened, doesn't pick the right person to believe at the right moment. We're human, and it happens. But a good authority tries hard to find the truth. They ask the hard questions. They look hard for the truth. One of the things that Xerxes doesn't do correctly in this passage is that part. He doesn't send someone to find out what the people of God say. He doesn't send someone to check on them. He doesn't ask for the other point of view. He just takes the people who write the letter at their word and decides to believe the worst of the people of God. We want to be good authorities. I want to be a good authority, someone that takes the time to dig deep and see the full story of what's going on and find the truth. The last group of people in this story are the enemies of God, the people who chose to lie in order to keep the people of God from being able to build their temple. And guys, we're really good at being mad at this group of people, right? They were enemies of God. We can be so upset with them, and we should be, because they're doing something really wrong. But how many times have we made a similar choice? Have you told a lie in order to get someone else in trouble instead of you? Have you chosen to deceive someone, to tell less than the truth, to try to hurt someone when you were promising to help? The reality is, guys, most of us have had moments when we've decided to be God's enemy, where we have picked a not truthful road, where we have decided to say things that aren't true about ourselves or other people. Can we hear from this passage the warning? The ugly thing that happens when we indulge in lying, when we won't speak truth. We can put the plans of God off track, guys. We can mess up what God wants to do in the lives of other people because we won't tell the truth. That's not okay. So what do we do with this? I hope that we remember to be truth tellers. I hope that we remember to use our words in a way that speak what is real and what is good into the lives of one another. I always hope that we remember that God is in control, and no matter whether it looks like He's winning at one moment or not, we can have confidence in Him. We can have hope in Him, because He sees all, and He promises us that He will be with us, He will care for us, and that He has a plan for us. I can't wait to see you guys next week. Thanks so much for joining me now.